want you to think about the things you do in order to parallel park your car. Position your car, check your mirrors, start backing up, straighten the steering wheel, begin turning your steering wheel to the left, check how close you are, turn right and continue backing up, adjust your position. These steps might seem needlessly overcomplicated. Sure, parallel parking is going to be difficult the first time you do it, but once you do get the hang of it, these steps are in your head and all you need to do is follow them. In fact, you're not even conscious of doing it. How do you parallel park? You just do. But what if I told you there was a time when people flew planes much like how you would drive a car? No checklist, no remote controls, nothing. The pilots would take the plane out of the hangar, take off, fly, land without using any kind of external tools. All of that changed on the 30th of October 1935. 1935. World War II hasn't started. Everything was technically supposed to be peaceful until... yeah. So you really can't blame the US Army Air Corps for wanting to prepare themselves, starting by replacing their old B-10 bomber. The US Army Air Corps asked for companies to design a bomber that could 1. Carry a useful bomb load, 2. Fly at 10,000 feet, 3. Fly for 10 hours straight, 4. Fly at a top speed of at least 320 kilometers an hour. Also, if they felt like overachieving that day, they had optional specifications. 1. A flying range of 3,200 kilometers, 2. With a speed of 400 kilometers an hour. Participating companies would need to present their prototypes at a fly-off here in an airfield in Ohio. In the end, there were only 3 competitors: the Douglas DB-1, the Martin Model 146, and the Boeing Model 299, dubbed by the papers as the Flying Fortress. Why the Flying Fortress? Well, if you put these planes right next to each other and it's self-explanatory. The Flying Fortress had 4 engines when the others just had 2. It had 5 .30 caliber machine guns and could carry up to 2.2 tons of bombs. One of the machine guns was positioned at the nose, which was highly unusual, and yes, that is where we got no question. It was the most sophisticated plane ever made. The plane flew from its manufacturing site in Seattle all the way to Ohio, and it took only 9 hours and 3 minutes at a speed of 406 kilometers an hour, faster than their competition and the requirements. Also, to up the ante just a little bit, the US Army Air Corps were planning to buy at least 200 bombers, and with a per unit cost of nearly $100,000, there was a lot of money at stake. The first evaluation was successful, and the Air Corps had secretly decided to purchase 65 of these, looking at the performance right in front of them. And then came October 30th, 1935. The Fortress made it onto the runway, took off only for seconds before climbing, stalling, banking, and nosediving into the ground before... The crash killed the pilot and 1 other crew member. It didn't matter how amazing the bomber had performed till then, it had crashed, disqualifying Boeing from the competition. The contract therefore went to the Douglas B-18 Volvo by default, even though it was severely underpowered. The Air Corps, however, didn't want to abandon this beast because this was an impressive plane and this was crap. With the help of a legal loophole, they managed to purchase 13 Flying Fortresses so they could figure out what went wrong. The initial evaluation showed no mechanical problems. After several rounds of rigorous testing, there were no flaws in the bomber. And then they turned to a place they never thought to look: the pilot. The pilot had a great many responsibilities, and while keeping track of all these things, he forgot to disengage the gust locks. Gust locks are usually engaged when the plane is on the ground so that the wind blowing around the plane doesn't start moving the controls of the plane. Basically an aerial handbrake, and the pilot simply forgot to release this handbrake. To quote a reporter, there was too much airplane for one man to fly. The obvious solution was to train the pilot so that they didn't forget things like this, but a lot of people felt doubtful since the pilot, Major Ployer Hill, was the chief of instruction at the US Army Air Corps and so was not lacking in either skill or expertise. They had to come to terms with the fact that because this plane was so sophisticated, more training could not be the answer. And then they came up with the most ridiculous idea. What if, and hear me out, what if we don't subject pilots to more training, but instead to a neat little tool, the pre-flight checklist? The pilots wrote a list of things down that they absolutely had to do before taking off. They kept the list as short and simple as possible, short enough to fit an index card. The pre-flight checklist actually managed to solve all their problems, and Boeing won the Army's trust by flying the Flying Fortress for several years without a single incident. And the Air Corps, convinced of its safety, bought a small number initially and ended up buying nearly 10,000 units by the end of the Second World War. It's important to remember that these pilots were not idiots. They knew how to taxi, take off, fly, land, and taxi back. They knew how to check the brakes, oils, engines, doors, and of course the gust locks. Dumb stuff that you don't need specialist training for. The world of aviation had been changed for good. After this point in history, every large aircraft that was manufactured needed a large number of complicated procedures that needed to be completed successfully for it to function properly. Except this time, they weren't complicated simply because now they had checklists for everything. But that was in 1935. Getting back to today, planes have definitely gotten way more complicated and sophisticated to extents that it's impossible to have a single person checklist and control the whole plane. But because the pre-flight checklist had simplified the whole process of taking off, any idiot with little to no training could do it with no problems by simply following the checklist. The problem comes when you want to land, but that is a whole other video. But moving away from airplanes and aviation, this is exactly the kind of situation we have found ourselves in today's society. We have large collaborative projects where each individual is a highly skilled worker working in highly specialized jobs and is required to complete their teeny tiny part of the ginormous project with no problems whatsoever so that the whole project doesn't fail. Humans don't make mistakes because we are stupid or don't have the necessary skills. If anything, we are incredibly intelligent and skilled, and every single amazing thing we've done in the last couple of decades is because of that. But along with all of that intelligence, skill, and most importantly specialization, we have also found ourselves with a whole lot of stuff that we can't keep track of. Our civilization has grown so complicated and sophisticated that there is too much airplane for one man to fly. Do you want to build a skyscraper? The smallest mistake could bring the whole building down. Do you want to build a website? The smallest mistake could bring your servers down. Do you want to fly a plane? The smallest mistake could have bankrupted what is today the largest airplane manufacturing corporation. These mistakes seem small when you look at the big picture, and that's what the human brain thinks about. But eventually a tiny but vital part of the machinery will slip, and you will forget to disengage the freaking gust locks. But we don't have to deal with these human flaws by improving our brain's memory and processing capacity, by augmenting our brains with a quantum computer or something. All you need is a sheet of paper and a pen, and you're all set.